Costume Man's timeline begins with the tragic death of a worker in an undisclosed theme park in Florida. On a summer morning, one of the mascot workers suddenly collapsed. Due to the company policy, he was quickly ushered away from the public and into a back room with the promise that someone would be there soon to assist him. Unfortunately for the man inside that costume, that promise was never fulfilled. This is the story of the Costume Man. It wasn't until several weeks later, when a park janitor began investigating a foul odor, that the remains that would come to be known as the Costume Man were found. The state of the body was described by a park worker as being, quote, positively vile. The humidity. The room we found him in wasn't ventilated at all. I can't even imagine what it was like for a poor guy to slowly die in there. If hunger didn't kill him, the heat did. End quote. Though tragic, there was nothing out of the ordinary about these events. It was during the autopsy on the deceased mascot worker when things began to turn unusual. The following is extracted directly from the autopsy report on Costume Man's body. The patient was provided still within the confines of the suit. EMS cited a fear of altering the body as there was reason for non-removal. Initial attempts to remove the suit by assistant provided futile. Preliminary observations suggest portions of the flesh have fused together with the material of the suit. Results typically seen only in victims of 3rd and 4th degree burns. Due to failure to remove the suit through conventional means, attempts were made to cut it open at the extremities. These proved fruitless with the exception of the segment just above the right wrist, which was able to be pried open with the efforts of examiners and several assistants. The right hand presented multiple lesions and hemorrhagings, particularly on the fingertips. Wound patterns suggest the patient may have been attempting to force his way out of the suit by hand shortly before death. Further examination awaits complete removal of the suit. From this moment forward, things only began to go stranger. Shortly after the report was written, the body of Costume Man suddenly disappeared without a trace from the country's lab. The security footage provided no clues as to the corpse's whereabouts. It was simply there for 1 second and gone the next, according to the security guard at the duty at the time. An investigation into the disappearance was opened by the county police, but was closed months later due to the lack of leads. This brings us to the first Costume Man sighting after his initial discovery, 5 miles away from the lab. A late-night commuter took his photography from his car window while driving along a scarcely used road. The image depicts a tall figure in a mascot costume dragging what appears to be a bloody corpse along the road, along with 2 slim blue antennas above the head. The description closely matches the reported deceased theme park worker's mascot suit. The driver did not stop any longer than necessary to take the photo, but reports that, quote, it was pleading with me. Have you ever heard a grown man sob? It was like that, but so much worse. It was begging for help. I almost threw up. Of course I didn't say, don't say you would have. Thing. There's no way it was human. End quote. Initially, most people were inclined to believe this was a hoax. Costume Man's tragic death had become a part of the local talk rather quickly, so citizens dismissed the sightings as simply some teenager's idea of a good joke. They would assume me proving chillingly wrong. A few weeks after the first sighting, on Halloween night, the local hospital began receiving an influx of patients, all children. At some time during the trick-or-treat, each children began reporting pain and discomfort, and then their parents had soon become horrified to discover that their children's skins had fused with a portion of their costume. The medical staff had to perform various emergency surgeries to remove the victims from their costumes. Parents started to point fingers on what could be causing this, trying to find an explanation. From maybe poor production qualities in the costume, to chemicals in the air, to some evildoer who had somehow harmed the children while they were out on site. However, none of these explanations fully satisfied all the questions. When the police began interviewing the victims, they received mixed reports. But all the stories had one factor in common: the sighting of a man in a blue monster costume, asking for help to remove it. To this day, though not legally prohibited, the use of costumes of any kind within this small town is highly discouraged. Any person who publicly wears a costume will be met with hysteria by the townspeople and will strongly request to remove it by local folks. Was Costume Man the victim of a tragic corporate oversight, or was there perhaps something more sinister? Regardless of the answer, one thing is certain. Costume Man still roams the area of his death, and he's still desperately trying to search for someone to give him the help he needs in order to remove the costume. But he's never given it. Instead, that person ends up dying.